שמקריא את הברכות וההספדים והכל, שיהיה לו את המיקרופון גם זה. אפשר? אתה יכול? תודה. אבל לא במקום. אוקיי. טוב, הוא צריך להחזיק ביד, כי זה לא יהיה אחרת. אוקיי. אין לי משהו. כן. כן. ביי. לא, זה לארצות הברית. אם תוכל לתפוס את זה... זה לשידור לארצות הברית, בסדר? אם תוכל לתפוס ושכל אחד... זה אני אשמח.
נושא כפרת פשע והקרבת ישע ומנוחה נכונה תחת כנפי השכינה ומעלות קדושים וטהורים כזוהר הרקיע מזהירים את נשמת הרב שמעון יהושע בן שאול וסהריה שהלך לעולם. Rabbi Dr. Stanley Joshua Schachter. Okay. Rabbi Dr. Stanley Joshua Schachter, Rabbi Shimon Yehoshua ben Shaul v'Sarlea, was born in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, the Yutet B'Iyar Tavshin-Pei-Tet, May 29, 1929, a few months before the Great Depression began. Others may speak, I hope, from his family about his early years, and obviously about his family life and his role in his extended family. And some of whom I've been privileged to know over the years in the U.S. and especially here in Israel. I want to tell you about Rabbi Dr. Stanley J. Schachter, beginning with how I first encountered his name, because I think it's emblematic of much of what he did within 93 years and 5 months he was privileged to enjoy in this life. אנקדוטה מתייחסת לפן אחד בלבד מן האישיות וההישגים של הרב הדגול שהיה בינינו ואיננו. זה לפני 50 שנה, כנסת הרבנים, the Rabbinical Assembly, הוציא לאור ספר חדש, מחזור לימים הנוראים, a beautiful מחזור. And in it there are many modern and contemporary compositions by poets and writers in a variety of languages. And one particularly arresting piece, page 399, is 398 and 399, is a riff on Kol Nidre. A nice, very honest, direct, contemporary meditation in 15 lines on human failure and the possibility of divine support. And I'm the guy who looks in the back of the book to see who wrote these things and who translated them. And it's attributed to what Ze'ev Falk, who was to become my revered teacher only decades later. And the flawless, elegant, penetrating translation was attributed to one Rabbi Stanley Schachter. And I wondered, how is this American rabbi familiar with such an obscure and wonderful literary work in modern Hebrew? And I asked myself whether I could ever learn to translate Hebrew poetry like that. I'm still working on it. Stanley Schachter earned rabbinical ordination, as I think you all know, Hasmacha mi Beit HaMidrash L'Rabbanim America, the Jewish Theological Seminary in America. And after a brief stint in the Congregational Rabbinate in Kansas City, Rabbi Shachter and Liefsa lived in Chicago, where he had a very successful rabbinic career. He then served for 15 years as Vice Chancellor of the Jewish Theological Seminary, and then re-entered the Congregational Rabbinate to spend 15 years, from 1987 to 2002, I believe, as the senior rabbi of B'nai Jeshurun in the suburbs of Cleveland, Pepper Pike, and help it to grow and move to the suburbs, grow, flourish. After retirement, he taught at the Siegel College of Jewish Studies and served as a chaplain at the famed Cleveland Clinic. And then, of course, they came here to live among us. Rabbi Shachter, Kvod Har HaMenuchot, was known and admired so widely that it took no time at all over the past 2 days to gather encomia to his life and his work. I turned to 3 of his 93-year-old colleagues in the United States and here in Yerushalayim. This is what I heard from Rabbi Jack Reamer from Boca Raton, Florida. The first word that comes to my mind when I think of my friend Stanley Schachter is upright. I say that not only because he was tall when I first met him more than 50 years ago, this is written a few years back actually. I think of him as upright because this is the way he has lived his life on and off the pulpit. He is the same person, whether he is preaching to hundreds or whether he is listening to one troubled soul. There is no duplicity in him, no deviousness, none. What you see is what you get with him. There is no fakery. I guess I should change the verbs to past tense, but I won't. There is no persona. There is no mask. On the pulpit, he never uses a special pulpit voice or a pretentious manner or a flowery vocabulary or a theatrical manner. Instead, he talks as naturally as he would have, as if he were speaking to you in private. There is no affectation. There is no show. There is just a decent human being up there struggling to determine what is right and true and sharing what he comes up with his people. There's just a devoted teacher up there trying to convey what he has learned about the texts and what he has learned about life with his people. And this is no politician up there who weighs his words carefully in order to win the approval of the powerful, or who determines where he stands by finding out first what is popular. Instead, this is a man up there who has a highly developed sense of right and wrong, of true and false, and who lives his life accordingly. בהמשך הוא כותב, הוא היה רב לא בזכות הלבוש או המעמד, אלא בגלל מי שהוא, נפשו הפנימית. היה בו כוח פנימי מסוים הבא מהכרה של מי אני ובעד מה אני. מהיעדר כל צורך לתאם כל יום מחדש את העמדות הבסיסיות כדי להתאים את עצמך למה שמקובל או מה שבאופנה מסביבך. Rabbi Herb Rosenblum, also 93, also a conservative rabbi, writes from Maryland. I emailed him on Sunday. So I knew him very well, of course, since we were contemporaries in many settings. With others, many contacts might mean pluses and minuses, but notwithstanding, they were all pluses. I can't say that for too many people. He was a very positive person. And from here in Yerushalayim, Rabbi Arnold Goodman, who wishes very much he could live well enough to be with us at this moment, and he's also 93. What was in the water in Morningside Heights 70 years ago? I have no idea. I want to drink some. Arnold Goodman said to me a couple of hours ago these words. Although we were not related, Stanley and I shared nephews and nieces, and we've been friends for a long time. When we were both rabbis in Chicago, when Elul would come around, it was a troika. Harold Stern, Stanley, and I would spend the month of Elul together on the phone, because there was no email, preparing for the Yamim Noraim. Stanley had a very clear and incisive mind, and he had a lot of talent. He had style. He had a very pleasant smile. He was handsome. But more than that, he was a person who projected a kind of, you can guess what word he's going to use, integrity. Right? בעברית קוראים לזה תוכו כברו. מה שבפנים זה מה שאתה רואה מן החוץ. אין חוכמות. Arnold Goodman said, I always found talking with him to be a delight. He knew exactly where he was going. When Gershon Cohen, who was the chancellor of the Theological Seminary in the early 70s, talked him out of the pulpit, offered him the opportunity to go to the seminary, it was a lech lecha. He's a rabbi, he worked in Parshat HaShavua. He left a lovely pulpit, and he went. He was ready to explore something new without knowing how it would turn out. Gershon Cohen offered him this challenge, and he took it. He had a warm personality, great people skills, and as a result, he developed close personal relations with legendary faculty members who had been his teachers. לסיום דבריו של ארנולד גודמן, סיפור אישי יותר. One year, when he was a rabbi in Cleveland, I was in Atlanta. The World Series was between Atlanta and Cleveland. And we made a wager. One of us would give a talk about the theology of baseball at the other's synagogue in the city of the winning team. He came to Atlanta. We had a ball. הוא סיים את השיחה ממש לפני שעתיים, לא בעברית, בערבית, חבל על דאבדים ולא משתכחים. And one slightly younger colleague wrote to me today, Dov Peretz Elkins, who lives here in Yerushalayim. Stanley and I were colleagues in Cleveland in the late 80s and early 90s. We studied together, cooperated on many projects. I'm skipping and leaving things out. I gave the invocation at his installation, and he did it mine. We also studied together here in Yerushalayim. He was a lamdan and a mensch. אני רוצה לצטט מדבריו של הרב המנוח בעצמו, כשהתראיין, כשיצא לגמלאות, התראיין בעיתון היהודי המקומי בקליבלנד. ושאלו אותו בין השעה, כדאי לחפש בגוגל ולקרוא. שאלו אותו, what were your greatest rewards? בין השעה הוא אומר, B'nai Jesher and congregants frequently consulted with me about personal issues. This enabled me to develop a much deeper relationship with them. With a close congregation like ours, connecting with people is critical and defines who we are. הקשר עם בני אדם הוא העיקר והוא מגדיר אותנו. שאלו אותו על הפילוסופיה האישית שלו, הגישה שלו לחיים. הוא אמר, greet every human being joyfully, הוא מצטט את המשנה, כן? ומקבל כל אדם בסבר פנים יפות. respect every human being. כבד כל בן אדם. בכל משפחת שכטר, המשפחות המסונפות מיניהם. Whether it was as a young fencer, as a student, as a rabbi, as an administrator, as an advisor, as a teacher, whatever role Stanley Schachter was filling when people met him, I see, your father-in-law, father, grandfather, great-grandfather, they all seem to come away with the same impression. This is a person of integrity, humor, warmth, a mensch. That is a legacy whose presence will be felt, will reverberate in your families. הרושם הזה שנעשה על כולם בטח יותר מכל עליכם. הרושם הזה יהדהד בדורות הבאים של המשפחות שלכם, גם לאחר שאנחנו הזוכרים והמכירים והמוקירים כבר לא נהיה חלק מן הזיכרון של החיים. נזמין את בנותיו וביתו של המנוח לדבר. איני?
אבא שלנו, סבא סטן. נולד בפילדלפיה ב-1929, בן למהגרים, סבא שאול, יליד אוסטרו-הונגריה, ממשפחה של חסידי ויז'ניץ, הנכד שלה שוחט. וסבתא שרה לבית בוקשפן, ילידת ירושלים העות'מאנית. ילד סנדוויץ', בן דוד ינקי ודודה מיידי. למרות הילדות בתקופת השפל הכלכלי, זיכרונות הילדות שלו שמחים. ילד ג'ינג'י, שחבריו קראו לו רד. גבוה, שובב, ספורטאי מצטיין ותלמיד מחונן. החיים בקרבת הסבים בשני הצדדים העשירו את עולמו הרוחני, האינטלקטואלי והמוזיקלי. כנער, כמו בני גילו בארץ ישראל, הוא שאף להיות יהודי חדש, יפה תואר חזק, תלמיד חכם ואלוף בנבחרת הסייף, עבד בחופשות הקיץ בחווה חקלאית, להכשיר אותו בעלייה. אחרי הלימודים בקולג' הוא למד בבית המדרש לרבנים והוסמך לרב. הוא שירת כרב צבאי בחיל הים האמריקאי וכיהן כרב בקנזס סיטי, שיקגו, היה סגן נשיא בבית מדרש לרבנים בניו יורק, ובסוף כיהן כ-30 שנה בבית כנסת בקליבלנד. לפני קרוב ל7 שנים הוא עלה לארץ יחד עם אמא, סבתא ליפסה, וזכה להיות מוקף על ידי משפחה וחברים, ילדים, נכדים ונינים, בבית מוזז החם והעוטף. גם כילדה הייתי מודעת לפעילות שלו בתחומים רבים, והייתי גאה בו. צדק חברתי, שוויון, מעמד האישה, מלחמה בגזענות. כשלא היה בית ספר מתאים לנו בשיקגו, הוא הקים בית ספר. אם היו ילדים בקהילה שלא יכלו לשלם למחנה קיץ, הוא דאג למלגות. כאבא הוא לקח אותנו לסרטים, לבאולינג, לימד אותנו בייסבול, עזר לנו בשיעורי בית גם כשלא היינו צריכים. בנה איתנו דברים מעץ וכמובן סוכות, סיפר בדיחות ושר שירי ערש, והסכים לנו לדברים שאמא, סבתא, לא הסכים עליהם. הנחיל בכולנו את הערכים שהאמין בהם, את האהבה למוזיקה, לזמירות, למנגינות מהבית. עד הסוף המוזיקה הייתה הדרך להתחבר אליו ולחבר אותו. מאז שאני זוכרת את עצמי, הזהות שלי קשורה בזהות שלו. הוא היה הרב ואני הייתי בת הרב. תפקיד לא קל לילדה בשיקגו בשנות ה-60, ולא תמיד שמחתי בתפקיד זה בלשון המעטה. לשמחתי זכינו בשנים ארוכות ביחד וגילינו אהבות משותפות כמו האהבה ליידיש. הוא אהב אותנו והיה גאה בנו, והכי אהב את אמא סבתא. השנים האחרונות לא היו קלות. היה קשה לראות את אבא, סבא, מאבד את מי שהיה. אבל עד הסוף נשארו בו האהבה והשמחה. And special thanks to Tony for taking care of them.
Michael.
כמה חזרות, חלק מהנושאים, באנגלית. Over the past few years, as our father was slowly disappearing, while amazingly retaining his good nature, wordplay, and love of music, I often thought how unfair it was that he wouldn't get a eulogy like the ones he used to give. It's perhaps an odd skill, but he was very good at it. And I'd heard many times about how even with families that he barely knew, he was able to say just the right thing to ease a family's pain. This is just one example, but in so many ways, his is a tough act to follow. And yet, all he ever expected was that we try our best. So let me start by paraphrasing something he said at his mother's funeral. Today is very sad, but it's not a tragedy. He lived a great life, and although the last few years have been tough, he had a great run, and we should celebrate it while we mourn its end. I guess every kid grows up thinking their parents are larger-than-life superheroes. But how many of them actually have a father who was a champion fencer, a naval officer, founded their school, was the rabbi of their shul, could hit a baseball farther than any of the other kids' dads. He built the stereo cabinet in our house, soldered together our walkie-talkies from a kit, took us camping and hiking and taught us how to build a fire and a tent and a sukkah and how to drill and saw and hammer. He even had his own bowling ball and much, much more. And besides being a loving and playful father and Saba, he was a true ish eshkolot with a breadth and depth of knowledge, hobbies, interests, skills, and causes that could have been intimidating, but somehow wasn't. So yeah, a tough act to follow. When I was little and someone asked me what my father does, I thought hard and I said, he gives speeches. And when they asked what else he did, I thought even harder and I said, he announces page numbers. And aside from the whole we become our parents thing, it took a while, but I realized he did so much more. When he decided to become a rabbi, he intuited, with inspiration from his uncle, that Judaism could be a force for progressive change and not just an inward-looking tradition and practice. And so he went to study at JTS, where years later he would be a vice chancellor. And when we were school age, he and our mother founded a school based on the same principles so that we could live and learn Torah with liberal derech eretz. And he didn't just teach abstract values and lead wonderful sedarim talking about Jewish freedom. He marched with the Chicago Board of Rabbis at the 1963 March on Washington, supporting American blacks, calling for jobs and freedom, civil rights, and equality. And equality remained a theme. Imagine the look on the faces of our congregants who had a meeting at our home and who barely addressed him as Rabbi or Rabbi Schachter when our cleaning woman, who was black, came into the meeting and said, "Stan, you have a phone call." To us, it was perfectly normal, and I only recently learned, for example, that at Ner Tamid he insisted on renaming the young men's congregation the teen congregation to be inclusive of teenage girls, and this was many years before the conservative movement finally included women as full members and participants of the minyan. But he wasn't just a public figure, he was a very present, involved parent. Maybe not as much as my mother, but still very there, and seemingly more than others' kids' dads, and very loving, even if it wasn't easily expressed. When not busy with meetings or study groups, for example, he often sang us to sleep, and we all remember that as a very special time, although maybe it was less frequent than we think. As the boy in the family, I was lucky enough to experience the not quite egalitarian father-son experience of the 60s, from hours upon hours of baseball drills in the backyard to going to shul for early Friday services and morning minyan when there was no school. in addition to outings to ball games and bowling instruction, outdoorsmen and car shows, the Harlem Globetrotters, and so much more. He had done amazing things throughout his life, and he was a very public figure, but thanks to Amy's buffer, and unlike other friends in a similar spot, I never really felt the rabbi's kid's pressure that other friends experienced. And although his standards were always very high, he was fiercely proud, absurdly proud of our every accomplishment. Trying our best was what mattered to him, and even if the results were nowhere near his. For example, as you've heard, he was a champion fencer, but when I once scored 4 points and had 2 steals as a reserve guard on the high school basketball team, he was in heaven, Once I had to write an emergency replacement term paper at the end of senior year in high school when motivation was not so high. He raised an eyebrow and gently asked if I thought it was up to my usual standards. I told him I knew it was bad, but that the teacher wouldn't notice and that high school was almost over, and he wasn't persuaded, but that was the extent of his gentle rebuke. In 5th grade, when the advanced Talmud Chug proved to be one bridge too far for me in Israel, I was sure he would be upset that I wanted to drop it, but it was enough for him that the teacher had recommended it and recommended me, and so he supported my evaluation that it was a little too much. Much more significantly, but similarly, years later, although he was incredibly proud when I began medical school, he was amazingly supportive when I decided to leave, and that was a tough time for me, but he made it clear that my happiness came first. He said they had nothing invested, which wasn't exactly true in my medical career. And I've already mentioned, and I'm coming to the end, the whole we become our parents thing, and when I look at myself, and besides the mirror where I see him, but when I think about the things I like to do and are important to me, his influence is clear. In no particular order, here are a few of my favorite things: family, community, wordplay, photographing way too many trees, public speaking and announcing page numbers, sports and exercise, home repairs, tiyulim, including long drives while my wife navigates, pride in and love of my children, extreme extroverted emotionalism, okay, maybe stoic to a fault, Jewish study prayer that inform an egalitarian approach to all people, jokes that aren't always funny, opera and long-distance swimming. Okay, maybe not those, but you get the idea. And while not feeling terribly original about any of this, I do feel truly and deeply blessed. Abba halachta b'shavua shel lech lecha, az lech lecha l'shalom v'tanuach b'shalom. Thank you for everything. I love you.
One of the things I didn't inherit from my father was his public speaking skills, and specifically his ability to speak from the heart without turning into a puddle. So bear with me. I will try. Got it. We have been saying goodbye to our father gradually, little by little, for quite some time now. Today is a final goodbye to his physical presence. And what a presence he had. He was tall and handsome. He had a warm and commanding speaking voice and a beautiful singing voice. But I take comfort in knowing that he lives on inside all of us through the many meaningful ways in which he helped shape us into the people we have become. It is immensely difficult to sum up a person's life, particularly my father's. He lived for more than 93 years and had a rich, meaningful, and multifaceted life. He was and did so many things. He was a son, a brother, a cousin, a nephew, uncle, great-uncle, husband, father, grandfather, and great-grandfather. He was a rabbi, learned, curious, intelligent, and articulate. He was a skilled orator, teacher, and community leader. He read voraciously on a wide range of topics. He wrote and translated books. He hosted television and radio shows, and he was a well-renowned leader of the conservative movement in the United States. Alongside his serious side, he was playful and enjoyed humor. He collected stories and relished telling them. He also collected jokes and wrote a book on Jewish humor,
which is actually a very serious book. As kids, he would regale us with stories about a friend of his who collected burps. I can remember once hearing a funny joke that had a swear word in it, and I debated the whole way home from school whether I could repeat it or not at home. And I finally decided that my father would find it funny. And I remember my relief and pleasure when he laughed out loud with me at the punchline. When we were living in London with young children, my father began writing a series of letters to our children about his pet gorilla named Tzipora, whom my father and mother adopted. It was a wonderful way to foster a bond with his grandchildren living far away using his humor and playfulness. My father brought a sense of joy to most activities. Like his father, he saw the proverbial cup as neither half empty or half full. He saw it as entirely full. He expressed and practiced gratitude long before it became a popular therapeutic tool. He did it instinctively. Even towards the end of his life, when his memory was all but gone, he maintained his good graces and manners and always expressed how much it meant to him that we had visited him, how wonderful it was to see us again, and how he looked forward to seeing us again, even when I wasn't sure he knew who we were. My father was deeply rooted in Jewish tradition and history. He was a devout Jew who took pleasure in ritual, prayers, synagogue life, holidays. He even loved Yom Kippur. And he brought joy to all the Chagim. Building and decorating the sukkah, first his and later ours, stands out particularly in my memories. And at the same time, he was a modern man, up to date on science and technology, until the internet. Museums, art, and culture. He read the New York Times daily and solved the crossword puzzle every morning. He was interested in politics, economics, investments, and gave us very important financial advice when we were starting out. He was a man of the world, and together with my mother, enjoyed traveling to different countries, exploring their cultures and histories. He enjoyed languages and particularly loved play on words. Although he was a scholar, he was also connected to physical interests. As you heard, he was an avid sports enthusiastic. I won't go through it all, but he took me to my first live sports game, basketball, at a young age. I think, Michael, you weren't free that Saturday night. But it started a love for me of the sport and unknowingly prepared me for what would become a very big part of my family to be as the mother of 3 sports enthusiasts. He liked creating with his hands, and as a younger man enjoyed carpentry. My father was a lover of nature, lakes, mountains, gardening, and hiking, and this too he instilled in me, minus the gardening. And those activities have continued to live on in the vacations Simon and I enjoy taking together and with our children. My father was often ahead of his times. He took interest in recycling and composting decades before it became commonplace. He was a civil rights activist, marched with Martin Luther King, and championed feminism in general and within Jewish practice when it was still quite controversial. Music held a central place in my father's life, and thus for all of us. He was a talented musician. He played saxophone as a child and clarinet as an adult. He sang everything from opera to chazanut, took voice lessons and loved to sing. He came from a long line of chazanim and passed on to us his family's nigunim. Shabbat meals and car rides were always accompanied by song. He encouraged me in choir and piano lessons and took interest in my own musical interests. Several years ago, he came with me to a Shalom Chanoch concert. He rocked. My father was a mensch. He enjoyed people and brought out the best in them. He, together with my mother, practiced hachnasat orchim like no one else I know. It was a regular occurrence to come home from shul on Shabbat and find a stranger or two, sometimes very strange, at our table, not to mention guests who came for a night and stayed for weeks, or providing a home for a Jewish teenage Iranian girl. My father was inherently calm, patient, gentle, and always found a way to diffuse tension or difficult situations with humor and grace. I wish I could do that as well. My father felt extremely fortunate to have married and built a life with my mother, who's taken such good care of him throughout the years, but particularly during the last few years. He loved you devotedly. He looked up to you and respected you. He really thought you were the cat's pajamas. And he demonstrated to us a love based on unquestioned commitment and shared values. Together, you have passed on to all of us your love of Judaism, Israel, Hebrew, humanity, community, study, music, nature, and family. The list goes on. But ultimately, for me, my father was my dad. And I feel so fortunate to have had him as my dad. Above and beyond the descriptions above, there are two main gifts, emotional gifts, I received from my father that stand out to me on a very personal level. First, my father created a feeling of safety. Perhaps his height and stature contributed to this, but I think his innate positivity, belief in goodness, and genuine optimism created a background of emotional security that not everyone is privileged to experience. As a young child, I recall being fearful of the water, and so on a summer vacation at a lake, my father taught me to float. He said, "Just bob like a cork in the water." I trusted him, and he made me feel safe and secure. I never became a brilliant swimmer, but I can still remember that feeling of overcoming a fear in his presence, feeling that I could and that all would be well. And the second gift was his ability to be my and my siblings' #1 fan. He took tremendous pride in all of us, overrated our accomplishments at times, but saw in all of us our potential and believed that we could be or do anything we wanted. If I was trying on a new outfit or parading around with a new haircut, he made me feel beautiful. Listening to a song I wrote at the piano, he made me feel talented. Taking interest in my schoolwork, professional training, he had a way of focusing on whatever you were doing and making you feel special. I know this was true for all of us. It has been a while since he was able to provide all of that, but till recently, he still made us feel special, loved, and cherished whenever we came to visit. For this and so much more, I am truly grateful. I hope, Dad, that you did not suffer too much earlier on when your loss of memory and disorientation must have been extremely frightening. And in this period, I hope you did not suffer too much pain in this final period and discomfort. Finally, I'd like to thank Tony, my dad's companion and carer for the last 3 years, for looking after our father with such care, sensitivity, and respect. We do not have the words to express how deeply grateful we are for all the support and care you've given both our parents. His life and memory are a blessing.
My father was a middle child of immigrant parents who grew up in a neighborhood in Philadelphia he said was so poor it didn't even have a name. His parents worked in the store in the front of the house, and he went to public school but was always tutored privately in Judaics. He was a gifted student, as you heard, and a national fencing champion, and he constantly played with his friends in the neighborhood who, as Amy said, called him Red because of his red hair. It was interesting to me that he always spoke positively about his childhood in Philadelphia, or even at working at the hotel in Atlantic City that his parents ran. The only exception that he ever was once he told me that it had been kind of hard for him to go to college because he had been skipped 2 grades. And not only was he younger than most of the students, but it was the same time that the GI Bill hit and all the soldiers returned to school, and he felt younger than them both in years and in experience. My father loved a good story. He was a curator of stories. He loved spotting them. He loved telling them. He loved retelling them. He loved sharing them with others. I thought I'd share a few. This is a story he used to love to tell. When we lived in Chicago, when I was asked where he worked, I answered, the basement. That's where his office was. In Cleveland, he officiated a man's 100th birthday party. And he would tell the story how the man got up, and the man said to everyone in the room, you know, people ask me all the time how it is that I grew to be 100 years old. And I'll tell you. And then my dad would pause and smile. And the man would say, I don't know. And a more recent story, when he was a chaplain at the Cleveland Clinic, he was in the elevator one day with a doctor from India with an Indian last name. And he asked the man in the elevator, the doctor, he said, might I ask you, what is the translation of your name? What does it mean? And the man said, it means a bull. And then the man asked my father, and what does your name mean? And my father, his face lit up, and he said, I'm not sure you want to know. But I'm the man that kills the bull. Schachter. Frequently when he would finish telling a story, he would say, isn't that marvelous? There was no malice, just pure enjoyment in his stories. And I sometimes would think about the other people who heard the comments, you know, the people that were at the birthday party for the 100-year-old man, or the people whose children said clever things. Could they spot the stories? Could they retell it with the same zest and joy, eyes lighting up, smile taking over his face, his feelings palpable to all the listeners? That feeling of, isn't it wonderful? It seemed to permeate his whole life. Like with his stories, my father could spot and identify all that was or could be wonderful in life, and then he would amplify it. He had the ability to not only see and find it, but to make it look easy. He was always doing these projects, and he would say things like, yeah, so I found this artist who made me this wall hanging, or I found this artist who figured out how to design cartoons in my book, or I found this art. How did he find them? I don't know anyone who could just find an artist, but he could. By vocation and general personality, my father was in service of others. His parents, his wife, his children, but it was far broader than that. I remember being struck that he hosted an event for Giora Feidman, a musician he happened to find, and helped him to launch his American career in our house. Or once he walked me around the JTS, they had just built the new library, and he had done a lot of fundraising for it, and he took me on a tour with such pride. And there was a time when my parents decided to host an Iranian student when Khomeini came into power, or these Israeli travelers who showed up for Shabbat and then stayed with us, I think, for 6 months or something. He would drive anywhere to pick up my friends if I was so sad that people couldn't come to a party. Or when I would come to Israel in my 20s and sometimes would be a little bit bored, he'd pick me up in a car and we'd drive out to Daliat El Carmel and buy a lot of blue glass and tapestry. And then every time he and my mother came to Israel for years, he would come home with blue glass and tapestry for me. Yeah. Here's one story that I have that I think exemplifies my father and who he was in the world. There was a man in his congregation who had had a very nice life, and then a whole bunch of tough things happened to him, and he was kind of lost. So first, my father gave him a role in the synagogue. He asked him to hand out the aliyot on Shabbat, and then he asked him to help with the daily minions. And that helped the man feel that he had a role to play. But I remember, even better than that, was one year on Pesach at our house. We had a lot of congregants over and a lot of family over, and he and the man decided to play a trick on all of us. So he had the guy go out and put a sheet on his head and go out at different door. And when the children went to open the door for Eliyahu Hanavi, this man came in, and he and my father were in cahoots about that and had a good laugh. And a few years later, my dad was very upset. I lived in an apartment, and it was a dump. So he decided that I needed better furniture, and you know what? He found a guy in Cleveland to design beautiful furniture for me, and he would go every week and tell me how he was going to change this or that, make it more beautiful. And it was a knockdown furniture where after the carpenter built it, they could bring it flat to Brooklyn. And so he asked this man to come with him. And the two men on an adventure came to my apartment and built the furniture for me. So my dad took this person who many other people would just kind of go, oh yeah, sad, too bad about him. And my dad gave him purpose, laughter, pride, and friendship. My dad was always amazed by his good fortune in finding my mother. He was in awe of her intellect, her parenting skills, her creativity, and all the roles she held. And he found tremendous joy in finding all the great things he could find in all of us, his children and his children-in-law and his grandchildren and great-grandchildren, and wanting to help us maximize our abilities to have a good life, from making sure that we all had nice homes, to really knowing all our friends, and to constantly be bragging about all of us. As you heard, my father always seemed to be a bit larger than other men, a natural leader. He could command a crowd. As a little girl, I felt it while riding on his shoulders, or seeing him at the head of the table on Shabbat, leading guests in conversations we wrote. Once, when I was in elementary school, we spent a Shabbat at JTS, and my dad was asked to give the sermon. And as he got up, he really got into it. He looked like one of those preachers on TV. You know, he rolled up his sleeves, and he was prancing around, and his enthusiasm, he threw off his jacket. He was just incredibly dynamic and charismatic. My mom turned to me and she said, "I'm really glad that you got to see Daddy like that." And in thinking about that now, I think that moment in time captured his essence. He was the man who just rolled up his sleeves. He found joy in the world. He worked his stage. And he shared his learning and joy with so many others. And he was my dad.
עכשיו נעמה ומיכאל בשם הנכדים והנכדות.
לרבי שקטר היו הרבה תארים חשובים ומרשימים, אבל עכשיו נתמקד בתואר החשוב בשבילנו, סבא. לאט, כן, נכון. זה לא יהיה לאט. מההתחלה? טוב. אני אנסה. לרבי שקטר היו הרבה תארים חשובים ומרשימים, אבל עכשיו נתמקד בתואר החשוב בשבילנו, סבא. סבא ל-13 נכדים ו13 נינים. כרב, בתפקידיו השונים, מחיל הים, בקהילות, ואפילו כשהתנדב כצ'פלין בבית חולים, ידע לפנות לכל אחד ואחת, ולהיות כתובת ודמות משמעותית בהתאם לסיטואציה ולצרכי האדם. גם בשבילנו, למרות שהיינו הרבה, ידע להיות מותאם אישית כסבא, סבא סטן, זיידה, סבא זיידה וגרמפה. לכל אחד מאיתנו היו חוויות וזיכרונות מהילדות ועד עכשיו, ולשמחתנו הם ימשיכו ללוות אותנו. מיכאל יגיד כמה, אני אקריא קצת מאדם, ואז עוד קצת, וזהו.
טוב, אוקיי. גם. אוקיי. אז בחרנו לשתף כמה רגעים, כי מי שהיה פה בהקדמה של כל הטקס הלוויה, שם רבי, דוקטור, וזה, מיליון טייטלס, לא שומעים. שומעים עכשיו? אוקיי, אז בהקדמה שנסעת עם כל הטייטלס ועוד פעם, ובסוף בשבילנו זה היה סבא, ואני בחרתי לשתף מי הוא היה, איזה סבא הוא היה בשבילי לפחות, בנקודת המבט שלי, אני לא מתיימר לייצג את כולם, למה? מצטער. אולי אבישי קצת עם הזיכרונות, בסוף אני אתמקד בכמה נקודות ברגעים, בתקופה הראשונה שלו כסבא, שזה בעיקר אבישי ואני היינו. היה ביתה צעירה מאוד בתל אביב, וסבא שוב לסבתא סבא בירושלים, והוא היה קודם כל סבא מאוד מאוד שונה מהסבא השני שהיה לי, שזה גם גדלתי בתרבות אחרת, במשהו אחר לגמרי, ובסוף סבא וסבתא שהם באים בקיץ לבקר, והיינו נוסעים איתם, אני זוכר תל אביב, ירושלים, דברים כאלה, לוקחים למוזיאון, הולכים למסעדות, ואיזשהו נתפס לי גם איזה שטות בראש, איזה בית קפה שישבנו פעם, ואני חושב שאכלנו, ושאלנו אם אנחנו רוצים קינוח, אז עברנו על התפריט קינוחים, והיה שם סלט פירות מומלץ בגדול, אז שאלתי בסבא, למה נראה לכם ממליצים כל כך על הסלט פירות? ומה זאת אומרת, חותכים חצי תפוז ותפוח ומוכרים לך את זה ב-30 שקל, לא יודע, כאילו, שזה גם מתחבר ליכולת שלו למצוא את ההומור בכל דבר, ואני חושב שזה גם משהו שבסוף אני רואה את זה גם באופי שלי, בסיטואציות כאלה ואחרות, מנסה להכניס קצת הומור ודברים כאלה. אני גם זוכר את הקיץ שמייקל ומרלין התחתנו, היינו איזה חודש בניו יורק אני חושב, וזה מתחבר לכל הסיפורי שחייה שלכם, שאני זוכר שסבא לקח אותי ואת אבישי ללמוד לחתור בסירת משוטים. היה פעם ראשונה בחיים שראינו דבר כזה אולי, ומתישהו גם שחינו באגם ובסירה וזה, ואולי עינב עכשיו יכולה להבין למה אני מבקש מהילדים הקטנים שלנו לשחות בכל מיני אגמים בסיטואציות כאלה. אז זה בתקופה ההיא. נקודה הבאה שקפצנו הרבה שנים קדימה וגדלתי והשתחררתי מהצבא, וכמו שאמרתי מקודם, גדלנו בתרבות אחרת לגמרי, ולא, אוקיי, סבא, ידעתי שהוא רב בארצות הברית, וזה קהילה, וקליבלנד וזה, ולא באמת הבנתי מה זה אומר, ואז הגעתי לקליבלנד אחרי הצבא, ופתאום הרגשתי כאילו, אנשים שם כל כך רצו כאילו לגעת בי, להתקרב אליי, רק בגלל שאני הנכד של רבי סטנלי שכטר במקרה הזה. לא כל כך הבנתי את האירוע הזה, אבל מאוד התרשמתי מהכבוד שרחשו, וזה לא עניין של הכבוד, זה הערכה הרבה, ואנשים באמת אהבו אותו, והוא אהב אנשים. וזה מתחבר לנקודה השלישית שרציתי לגעת בה, שיצא במקרה בסוף שבוע שסבא וסבתא עזבו את קליבלנד, הייתי בדיוק בסוף שבוע הזה בארצות הברית, והגעתי לטקס, ובכלל כל הסוף שבוע הזה הסתובבתי עם סבא, גם סבתא ביקשה ממני שאני אסתובב איתו, כי כבר לא כל כך שמחה על איך שהוא נהג וכאלה. אז יצא לי לעשות איתו סיבוב שהוא בעצם הלך להיפרד מכל מיני אנשים, הוא הלך פעם אחרונה נגיד להסתפר אצל איזה ספר וזה היה כל כך מרגש, כאילו בן אדם, בסדר, זה ספר איטלקי, נכון? איטלקי. והם התעמדו שם איזה 5 דקות, מחובקים, ולא יכלו להיפרד, כאילו, וסבא כמובן אמר, תבוא לישראל, תבוא לבקר, וזה. אבל, אז נקודה כזאת, באמת איך הוא נגע בכל מיני אנשים שכאילו לא קשורים בשבילו, הוא לא היה רב, הוא היה בן אדם, שהוא בא להסתפר אצלו, אבל ראיתם כמה חיבור וכמה הוא נגע בבן אדם הזה. ועוד איזה אנקדוטה האירוע הזה, בסוף הטקס, בטקס פרידה, ניגש אליי איזה מישהו, שזה גם מתחבר למשהו שמייקל אמר, או אמא אמרה בהתחלה, הוא סיפר לי, תדע כמה סבא שלך היה אדם גדול, שאשתי נפטרה ולא היה לנו כסף למצבה, אז הוא לא הלך וניסה לגייס תרומות וזה, הוא הלך, קנה מצבה, והמצבה על הקבר שלה זה הוא שילם, ובשקט, ואף אחד לא יודע מזה, ואתה בן אדם הראשון בערך שאני מספר לו את זה. אז זה גם כן איזה משהו, מישהו פשוט עם כזה פשוט נגע בו. ועל הרב גוניות, גם כן הנקודה שחשבתי לגעת בה, שבטקס סיום, כולם פה דיברו על העניין המוזיקלי. אני לא הכרתי ידעתי שהוא תמיד שר מזמורים ושר שירים כאלה שלא יודע, אבל בטקס, בסיום, בעצם כל האנשים שליוו אותו ב30 שנה האלה, הוא בחר לשיר שירים, הוא היה חזן של הבית כנסת או משהו, הם שרו אופרה בלטינית. וזו הפעם הראשונה שאני ידעתי שהוא שר דברים כאלה, לא? אז פתאום גיליתי עוד איזה רובד מסוים שלא הכרתי, וזהו. השנים האחרונות היו קצת שונות מהסבא שזכינו וראינו להכיר לפני, וזהו, עצוב שזה נגמר ככה, אבל זו דרכו של העולם.
מאדם, אני אנסה לאט. When we were still living in London, Saba began writing stories to us about Tzipora, the gorilla you had adopted. At that time, I didn't yet realize that these stories reflected some of Saba's favorite things in life, family, humor, and a good play on words. I remember looking forward to hearing about Tzipora, how excited I was leading up to Pesach, thinking I was going to meet her, and also how disappointed I was when in the next letter that came, I learned that you had decided it was best for Tzipora to go and live with other gorillas. Maybe also best for you. Those letters were really only the beginning of a very nice relationship we had, and I was always very excited when I knew that you were planning a trip. Saba had an amazing ability to make you feel like the center of the world and engage with people in a way that put them at ease. I love how 1 minute we could be in the midst of an intellectual conversation, and the next he would do or say something mischievous and immediately smile. The first funeral I attended, Adam, was Babi Sarah's. I remember not knowing exactly how to feel or act and not really knowing how to approach Saba. We were sitting in the second row behind Saba and Uncle Yankee. Just before the funeral began, Saba turned around and said to Uncle Yankee, "I'll bet you $10 my speech is longer than yours." They both laughed, and Saba turned around to me and smiled, as if to say, "Don't worry, I'm still the same person today." I feel incredibly fortunate to have had a close bond with Saba, and I have no doubt that my love for our extended family, mischievous jokes and puns began with him. מהילדות אני זוכרת נסיעות כיפיות לבקר את סבא וסבתא בקליבלנד, וכמה סבא אהב לארח אותנו, להשוויץ בנו ולקחת אותנו לטייל. זיכרון ספציפי שחרוט בי, סבא מתארגן בבוקר ואני משום מה משקיפה ומזועזעת מהברז שהוא השאיר פתוח. סבא הסביר לי בסבלנות שבארצות הברית יש יותר מדי מים ויהיה קשה לשלוח אותם בחביות לישראל. אז בסדר, לפחות נהנינו מאמבטיות קצף. אני מאוד שמחה שזכיתי שסבא ילווה אותי בבת מצווה שלי וגם בחתונה שלי ושל שי, וכמה הוא הכניס אותו ללב ולמשפחה. ואחרי החתונה, כשטסנו לארצות הברית, הספקנו להתארח אצלכם, אצל סבא וסבתא, פעם אחרונה לפני שעזבתם את קליבלנד, ואירחתם אותנו באהבה. אני רוצה טיפה לדבר על השנים האחרונות, מאז שעליתם לארץ. לשמחתי הרבה, סבא וסבתא בחרו להתמקם קרוב מאוד לדינה וסטיב, ההורים של שי, והתראינו בתדירות מאוד גבוהה. סבא התרגש מהמעבר לארץ הקודש, ודיבר באופטימיות רבה על ירושלים ועל האנשים כאן. זכינו לשמוע הרבה סיפורים שלו מהעבר, ואת חלקם אנחנו כבר יודעים בעל פה. גם לקראת הסוף, אני מרגישה שעדיין היה אפשר להרגיש את האסנס של סבא. עדיין כל כך שמח לראות את בני המשפחה, התרגש והתפעל מהסיפורים, הביע את האהבה שלו לסבתא, ובשבילי היה מרגש במיוחד לראות את היכולת המופלאה שלו, שעוד נשארה, לתקשר ולשחק עם יובל. אוהבים מאוד, כל הנכדים והנינים.
עכשיו נזכה לשמוע ממי שהכיר את סטנלי שכטר יותר מכולנו, מליפסה.
I'm not going to speak very long. I don't need to say anything more about Stan. What you've heard from the children and grandchildren is who he really was. And what I do want to say is, as the wife of a congregational rabbi for almost 67 years, I'm familiar with funerals and death, and I know that's what happens to us. But I feel in a way that today is a celebration of life, of a long life, of a happy life, of a life that gave joy to so many, many people. And I want to thank some of them. I need to thank Tony. Tony made the last 3 years not only livable for Stan, but also for me, and also for all of our children. And we're so grateful that he was so caring and so devoted. I want to thank the staff at Beit Moses, which was our home for the last 7 years. It's not easy to move from one country to another at our advanced age, to make new friends, to be treated with such generosity and kindness, and to make years that could have been very, very difficult, really pleasant. So I thank the staff of Beit Moses and the Diarim of Beit Moses who made these last years so good for us. most of all, I want to thank our children and grandchildren. We were together since Stan ate dinner at Friday night on at the table. One of our friends here made kiddush for him. And then something happened during the night. And when we came down the next day, he was not responsive. And he has not been responsive since then. He was lying in bed, breathing shallowly. And the beauty of our family, who came around to sit with him, to sing with him, to talk to him. I hope he heard some of it, but it was a very precious time, and I don't take that for granted. So thank you, all of you who helped make these last years good for us, and we will miss you even as you were recently. We will remember how you were through the great years of your life. And thank you for taking this little shtetl Williamsburg girl out of the shtetl and bringing me into the big, wide world. And we had wonderful times together. So thank you very much. Shalom. And may you have peace.
שני מזמורי תהילים קצרצרים. מזמור לדוד, אדוני מי יגור באוהליך, מי ישכון בהר קודשך, הולך תמים ופועל צדק ודובר אמת בלבבו, לא רגל על לשונו, לא עשה רעהו רעה, וחרפה לא נשא על קרובו, נבזה בעיניו נמאס ואת יראה אדוני יכבד, נשבע להרע ולא ימיר, כספו לא נתן בנשך ושוחד על נקי לא לקח, עושה אלה לא ימות לעולם. ואיך אפשר גם בלי לשיר ביחד. מזמור לדוד, אדוני רואי לא אחסר, בינות דשא ירביצני, על מי מנוחות ינהלני. נפשי ישובב, נפשי ישובב, ינחני במעגלי צדק, למען שמו. גם כי אלך בגץ על מוות, לא ירא, כי אתה עמדי, שבטך ומשענתך, שבטך ומשענתך, המה ינחמוני. תערוך לפני שולחן, תערוך לפני שולחן, תערוך לפני שולחן, נגד צוררי. דשנת ושמן ראשי, דשנת ושמן ראשי, דשנת ושמן ראשי, כוסי רוויה. אך טוב וחסד ירדפוני כל ימי חיי, ושבתי בבית אדוני, ושבתי בבית אדוני. אל מלא רחמים שוכן במרומים, המצא מנוחה נכונה תחת כנפי השכינה, במעלות קדושים וטהורים, כזוהר הרקיע מזהירים את נשמת מורנו הרב שמעון יהושע בן שאול ושרה לאה, שהלך לעולמו, בגן עדן תהא מנוחתו. אנא בעל הרחמים, הסתירהו בסתר כנפיך לעולמים, וצרור בצרור החיים את נשמתו. אדוני הוא נחלתו, וינוח בשלום על משכבו, ונאמר אמן. קדיש.
יתגדל ויתקדש שמי רבה, ועמד יברח חירותי וימליך מלכותי, ויצמח פורקני ויקרב משיחי, וחייכון וגמייכון וחיי בכל בית ישראל, לעגלה בזמן קריב אמרו אמן. יהי שמי רבה מברך לעולם עמי עלמיה, יתברך וישתבח ויתואר ויתרומם ויתנשא, ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתהלל שמי לקודשה בריחו. לילה מן כל ברכתה ושירתה, תושבחתה ונחמתה, אמירן בעלמה ואמרו אמן. יהי שלמה רבה מן שמעיה וחיים טובים עלינו ועל כל ישראל ואמרו אמן. עושה שלום במרומיו, הוא יעשה שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל ועל כל יושבי תבל ואמרו אמן.
מסע הלוויה יוצאת לגוש הדף, וכאן יכנסו לרכבים לנסוע הרינו בשיירה, מי שמאבד את השיירה שיכתוב בבייס שער ורד המנוחות. בבקשה, שער ורד. עובדים בנסיעתם מתקדים. בואו. שבסתר עליון אצל שעות העקרונה נאמר אדוני מעשיות סליחה לא תירה מפרד לילה מחץ ירוק ומעמד ערבו פריה לא חיקת בשוק סורי אשר אדוני צום ולעבוד ולעבוד נתן ואדוני כפי ישמע אדוני מבורך והוא רחום וירפא עוון ולא ישחיל לאכול השביעתו ולא יעקל חבתו. תודה על ויתקדש שמי רבה. אמן. אמן. חי יכון וממכון ישראל בעגלה ובזמן קריבים. אמן. יש רבה. שמי רבה מברך לעולם לעולם אמן. 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 לא תעונה אליך רעה ונגע לא איתך והולך כי מלאך נצחה מלאך נצחה בכל הצלחת ואופת בציבור שמות נפיר ותניס גיגת השבוע חניתיר ותגריעו כי אתה שביעי כהן ימנהו כמו נוחי ושמח על צבע עובדי אוכלים אז ביברי בישועתי אז קמנים אז ביברי בישועתי בבקשה, להיכנס לרכבים, לנסוע תגיד להם מי שרוצה
אני פה עם הרכב, בסדר. כן, כן, כן. כן, כן, יש חניה פה, זה כזה כמו שיפוצים כזה, אתה תראה. ביי. גם זה נהיה, אתה רואה? לא, אתה לא אומר לי שבאת ברגל משם לפה.
Mom, no. It's a bit of a walk. It's a bit of a walk, so we should come out now. She needs to jacket. Okay, no, but he's saying it's a walk. It's a bit of a walk, so he's saying maybe we should start.
כן, בקומה אפשר להתחיל להתקדם בקומה הזאת בראשון שמאלה.
It's not inside here?
מי עוזר לאמא שלך ללכת? כן.
היי, תתחיל.
קיים לו.
No.
ישר פנייה ראשונה שמאלה. עזר. עבר. בבקשה לתת לעבור שנייה אחד. פה. ישר, פה ישר, מתחיל לשמאלה. תאמין לי. כן. נקטע כנראה שאין פה כל כך קליטה בתוך המבנה הזה. מה שיהיה, אנחנו בסדר, יכול להיות שכשאני בתנועה תכף נעצור, זה יתייצב. תודיעי לי פה עכשיו, תהי איתי על זה. טוב. אל מלך יושב על כיסא רחמים מתנאים בנסידות וכלעמון החמור ברבים ישום ושום הרבה וכלעמון הרבים וצריכה לבוא שמיים איך דקות מכל מחמור הרבים ציבור שלנו היום הירד אדוני ויעבור אדוני אדוני אל רחמי אדוני רחמי
Many years.
No Rabbi for a house. You want it? You're going to sit on the reception for heaven.
Big stones. Bigger stones.
לפני השקיעה.
מי שרצה לגש, בבקשה להמשיך.
להמשיך?
מכתב לדוד שמלך, כי רצו לבך אמר, אם הוא לעשות דבר מרחם לנו, בעלה וחוקים אינם, בעלה זהות, כמו זמן, זה מזל, אנחנו לבנים, אנחנו כבר עליה, ואיך אדם
השבעה תתחיל במודיעין, אפשר לבקש מקרובי המשפחה פרטים לגבי המועדים והמקומות, כי השבעה תמדוד קצת, נדמה לי, מהרי יהודה עד לחוף הים. סליחה?
לפני שאנחנו יוצאים, אנחנו רוצים להיפרד בשיר עם סבא של אבא. שחטרים.
Oh
ייחודית לבן אדם באמת ייחודי. לנחם את האבלים בדרך החוצה ומכאן ואילך בשבעה. מן השמיים תנוחם.
השביל.
נראה לי שתסגרי, מה את אומרת? לא. אוקיי. יהיה בלק ותזכרי.